Good evening, Tobago, and thank you for joining us for our final pre-budget conversation. We have had several conversations, some face-to-face, some virtually. We have had thousands of you viewing, hundreds of you commenting and sending questions and sending suggestions. Many of you have taken the opportunity to use the platform set up at the Division of Finance, Trade and Economy, that online platform, to make submissions about the budget. And in essence, I try to democratize the budgeting experience, to have as many of you as possible participate and contribute on an almost nightly basis to these conversations and these queries. We have looked at everything from the role that youth will play, food security, rural development. We have had the women come in and speak to women issues and budgeting. We have looked at childcare. We have looked at education. In fact, our session on education was the most viewed of them all to date. And this evening, we have our final pre-budget conversation, but certainly not our final conversation, because when the budget is presented on Thursday, post the budget, we will have continued conversation as we try to rebuild the economy of Tobago and make this island viable. Our final evening, we are discussing autonomy and the economy. What role does the autonomy play in terms of the development of the Tobago economy? And I'm hoping that by the end of this session, you will understand how sometimes we are just hamstring, just by virtue of the absence of the kinds of autonomies that we require in order to build out and develop this place we love called Tobago. This evening, we have three gentlemen with us. One I know you definitely know. The other two, I view them as new and upcoming voices and faces in the conversation about Tobago's autonomy. And it's critical that we bring new voices and faces to the conversation simply because I know some of you might be experiencing some face fatigue. You're tired to see the same face over and over again, saying the same things over and over again, and it will appear as if no one is listening to them on the matter of autonomy. And so we're hoping in this new dispensation, this new push for greater autonomy, that I can empower some new voices and some new faces to join the discourse on autonomy. And more so, I want to empower younger people to join the discourse. Even if you don't share my views on autonomy, even if you have a different idea as to how we can achieve this thing, I want to welcome you in the conversation. And we must have those conversations and agitations until such time as we get the autonomy we desire. But what role does autonomy play in our economic fortunes? And this evening we have perhaps Tobago's most famed economist to date. And I mean, he needs no introduction. He's a Shallaville man, kind of like me. And he is Dr. Vanos James. Next to Dr. James, we have another Shallaville man, but he's in the creative sector. And we did have a session for the creatives. Auntie Annette and all of them come out and we spoke about what we require to do for the orange economy. But we have a songbird, a chanter, a guy who does his thing on the microphone. And he's from Shallaville as well. We just call him Desi Allen. So Desi, welcome. And then finally we have another young man. He too, I see, is part of the creatives. He does gospel songs. And he has been lending his voice to the social media space on autonomy issues. He's from out of Mason Hall. They might say a bias tonight because Dr. James from Shallaville, but living Mason Hall area. And I have another Mason Hall man here. So it's basically Shallaville and Mason Hall in the house tonight. But so be it. We have Mr. Nicholas Brathwaite tonight joining us. So four of us here in this conversation. And over the next hour to an hour and a half thereabout, we will spend some time conversating about the dichotomy that is autonomy and the economy. As the Secretary for Finance, Trade and the Economy, I could tell you at the very start, gentlemen, that there are some things I wish we could do that the absence of autonomy just prevents us from doing. And let me just give an example as an opening salvo so that those viewing can understand the crisis that we may be facing. Every year, Tobago receives 4.03% on average from the national budgeting experience. That tends to result in recent times anywhere around $250 million for capital development expenses. If the THA was a business, and the law says that we are a body corporate, which means we ought to be able to operate as a business. But if the THA was a business, getting as a steady flow of income, $250 million on average per year, the THA will be able to go to any financial institution in this space and easily get from them $1 billion, $1.5 billion, and be able to upfront in the first year of your 4-year program or 5-year program or 7-year program, have a significant chunk of money to do your capital development, budgeting, and expenditure. But guess what? Even with $250 million more or less guaranteed by virtue of the DRC, and I must say thank you Dr. James and Hochoy and others who were pivotal in that experience, although we are guaranteed to get minimum around $250,000, which on average is about 4.03% of the budget. As the Secretary of Finance, Trade and Economy, I can't walk into FCB next door or walk down the street to RBC or walk across Republic Bank, and if you haven't realized it, we are in the chamber tonight for our final session, and just say, give me a loan of $1 billion or $1.5 billion. Ordinarily, if I was a business, making that amount, getting that amount for capital development in a fiscal year, the banks will easily give that loan. But I can't do it as a THA, although the law says I'm a body corporate. I have to go down to Trinidad, sit with Minister Imbert, who is in charge of the sovereign's purse, and I use that in quotation marks, and he, the minister, have to give permission in order for me to borrow. Right there and then, I'm giving you off the bat what is an obvious implication on our economic space from not having the kinds of autonomy that we need. And no, I'm not saying that I want to take our monies and go to the bank and ask for $1 billion and take it out. I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying that should have been an option available to me, but that could only be an option available to me and the THA if it is we have greater autonomy. So there are many things in our day-to-day lives, in our budgeting experience, that requires greater autonomy in order for the thing to work well. And so I want to start with you, Dr. James. Tell Tobagonians how pivotal this autonomy thing is, if it is we are to get significantly better lived experiences when it comes to how we manage our economy in Tobago.
Well, the place that I would start as a Tobagonian and as an economist is that autonomy will provide Tobago an opportunity to take decisions that would allow us to take responsibility through those decisions for the country with equal rights to do that as Trinidad has. If you look at the way policy is made in the country, Trinidad makes policy as though it's making national policy for itself and Tobago. Tobago cannot make policy as if it's making it for the country itself and Trinidad. But if we had autonomy, we'd be able to do that. And what that really allows Tobago to do is to solve development problems that the country has through investment in Tobago in a way that Trinidad assumes it could do but always fails to do. The direction in which Trinidad wants the country to go, continuing dependence on oil and gas, the nation will not develop on that basis. Tobago has to be in a position to take investment decisions to move away from oil and gas. Every time oil prices rise, the country goes into a disincentive to invest to transform the economy. But that is in Trinidad. In Tobago, the pressure to invest to transform the economy is always there. But we do not have the right to take the investment decisions and put the policies in place to support those investment decisions. Autonomy is really a legal environment in which we will have that right to take equal responsibility for the country and put policies in place in order to execute that responsibility. That's the real meaning of autonomy for Tobago and the country.
Well, let me give an example of what you're talking about. Tobago being able to help the country, and I hope you understand that Dr. James is not just saying giving Tobago greater autonomy is important just for the Tobago economy, just for our microeconomy on this 116 square miles and all our acreage of water. No, it's beyond that. The entire country can be positively impacted by Tobago getting this autonomy. And if you're watching from Trinidad, you have to understand that when we scream into the top of our lungs, we want autonomy. It's not because we hate Trinidad or we want to diss Trinidad, but in essence, we want to help you because we realize your government structure down there failing you, and we could potentially help you. How we help you in terms of practical examples? Look at tourism. Our economy is service-driven. And you will know, Dr. James, for any service-driven economy to do well, you need movement of people. Movement of people in and out, movement of people internally. For service economies to move well. Just look at Tobago. Our airport got reopened some 3 months plus after Trinidad's airport international flights. Middle of January. Tobago had no say in that. Tobago could not say, we open in the airport yourself and come in with your flight, right? Then we had to threaten and beg. We say we go come to the house and decide we opening the beaches ourselves, all kind of thing. Eventually, about a week into April, just before Easter, we got all the flights reopened. The beaches were open before that in about February. But we didn't even get all flights. They only give us a dozen flights. When pre-COVID, we were somewhere close to 30 flights, especially on a weekend and a long holiday. Again, somebody else calling the shots. Caribbean Airlines, they sent me, well, to get the Tobago airport open so you have later flights and more flights, it means that we have to pay to keep the Tobago airport open longer. The first price I was quoted is 500 US per hour. Now, I know for a fact it's 600 US per hour to have it open every hour beyond 10 p.m. in Tobago. Meanwhile, Trinidad Airport is treated as a 24-hour airport. But this island of Tobago, really and truly, if we do the tourism thing well, and we bring the numbers in here, all them US dollars you can't get in the bank, that the businesses have to suffer for, and they have a thriving black market for US currency, will be solved. Because we could potentially deposit in the national treasury and the national framework, the national financial systems more so, the kind of quantities in US dollars that Trinidad is not getting from the manufacturing sector or other streams, because all they're studying is oil and gas, as they are now. There seem to be a resurgence, so everybody running helter-skelter, trying to see if they could up production, up sales, up intake, and everybody forget the conversation about diversification. But for us in Tobago, that conversation will always be present and in the forefront of our minds, because all we have in our lived experience is the service sector. We have no choice, so we have to talk tourism, we have to talk education for export, we have to talk service-driven industries. we're not getting the opportunity to do that. Yes, we could talk it. Yes, we could put some plans in place, but the kind of real adventurous policy framework that we need to implement, we've been hamstrung.
Maybe I wouldn't say the policy framework would be adventurous. It would be scientific.
Well, when I say adventurous, I mean beyond what the ordinary understands. And beyond what Trinidad understands. Exactly. So, of course, it has to be data-driven, science-driven.
Scientific policies. And that's what Trinidad doesn't know, the science of Tobago or the country in a way that allows us to diversify the economy. So if Tobago has equal rights to make national policy and make it without asking the parliament in Trinidad if to do it or not, then the some scientific policies you're talking about we could put in place, and that is what is going to make the nation rich outside of oil and gas and escape the trap of energy prices. Right now, energy prices $100 and something a barrel.
Correct.
$5 something gas. When you face that kind of inflow of foreign currency, you have no interest in diversification. The behavior of the energy sector is a constant disincentive for Trinidad and Tobago to diversify. But as you're pointing out, the Tobago economy is such that it could only develop by diversifying the national economy. And that is the trick to autonomy, really. We have to sell autonomy to the country in a different way to the way Robinson and Murray did. Your generation has to be more clever than Robinson and Murray to sell autonomy as a national project, as something that benefits Trinidad and Tobago, and as something that the nation needs to do if we are going to be able to diversify the economy. So when you sell it that way, it doesn't sound as though you're talking about secession or something in Tobago's interests alone. But you've got to be able to frame those issues in a way that you could take to Port of Spain and say, let me put you sit down in a classroom and explain to you what autonomy really means for Trinidad and Tobago. It's a governance arrangement for the country that democratizes the nation, democratizes government. Democratic government for Trinidad and Tobago means in part autonomy for Tobago. And it means changes in the governance arrangements inside Tobago that Tobago will want to put in place, even if Trinidad can't put them in place down there. If you look at the way government is set up in Trinidad, it really is a cabinet monarchy.
It is.
Tobago needs a democratic government, not a monarchical system. It needs a system in which there's structured arrangements for the people to be able to participate in making policy and in guiding the executive council as to what we, the people, want done. Trinidad can't set that up because of race. But Tobago could set that up and be an example to the country. And if you don't have autonomy, you will not be able to set it up in Tobago. And if you can't set that up, you can't develop Tobago.
And I want to bring you in here, Nicholas, because we spoke about oil and gas and where that is going. One of Trinidad's fears is giving us greater autonomy means that they are giving up an almost dictatorial, and Dr. James called it a monarchical arrangement over resources that are found within the Tobago space. There is a fear of that, the kind of democratization that Dr. James speaks about, because that means that you are empowering a group of people away from the center. And of course, should that happen, Dr. James, you expect other zones and districts across the country to start saying, but wait now, we could do this thing too. And it will lead to a whole political revolution across the entire country. A democratic one, of course, which we need to develop as a nation. But as a young Tobagonian who is looking on in this space, employed by the THA, working here, living here, Mason Hall man, how do you feel about the absence of control or the lack of management rights that the people of Tobago have over the resources in its own space as an island. How do you feel about that? And what do you think should be some of our first steps towards treating with that?
Well, quite frankly, I have to say, Chief, I am not excited by the upcoming budget. Although I expect and I anticipate that you are going to put forward a very beautiful and exciting budget. Because of the absence of autonomy in Tobago, many of us are not excited by the budget, because you mentioned that you still now have to, this is just going down to Trinidad and asking them for a certain amount of money, which we are not sure that we will get. Now, when we're talking about autonomy, I am saying that we have to be careful that we don't end up in a political quagmire, because there are persons who would say, but autonomy was already handed to Tobago on a silver platter. The question is, what is autonomy? Autonomy for you might be different to me, and to Desi, and to Dr. James. I am saying that Tobago needs to come to a place where we have data that suggests that, listen, this is what 80% of the Tobago people want. And I'm asking the question, how do we get to a stage where we could say, you see this proposal in terms of autonomy? Because I'm saying we have at least 3 different proposals on the table. We have the current Tobago Island Government Bill, we have federalism, and we have confederalism. I'm saying the three of them are not for any one administration or for any one person to say, well, this is what Tobago should get. I'm saying, how do we engage Tobagonians and gather the data to some degree to say, well, 80% of Tobagonians actually agree that the Tobago Island Government Bill is what we actually want. And it is up to your administration to say, now listen, the people have spoken. So although I wanted confederalism or federalism, the people have spoken. So I'm saying that I would appreciate this administration to reach out to the people in that wise, to get once and for all the mandate of the people.
You know, I'm real happy you raised the points you have raised, because in essence we have been talking about a lot of stuff for a very long time. Prior to me coming to this seat, there were many ideas floating around, many incarnation of bills, many committees established to go around to hear from people, to take notes, many of those arrangements. And in speaking to some young people, they were saying, Chief, we fed up at the same process. You have a committee, they go around, they consult, you hear from people, you create a bill, you go back to Parliament, rejected, you come, you do it the cycle again. And perhaps that element of attaching strong scientific data to what exactly Tobagonians want, polling Tobagonians on the key principles when it comes to autonomy, and seeing if this is what they want versus this is not what they want, gives us, I think, an even stronger voice to be able to say, is not Farley and them, is not PDP want this, yes. It's not a PNM bill, it's not a UNC bill, but this is what Tobagonians say they want. And so in essence, forcing the central government, national parliament, to look at what the islanders saying they want, yes, even if they were saying they want, versus what they want to give. And I think they will be hard pressed, politically that is, to turn down what the people want and still claim that this is what is good for the people. And so I like that suggestion. There isn't anything in law, and one of the things I'm happy for is that we're still finalizing the writing. In fact, it's going to the printers in the morning. So we have our final meeting tonight. And so I'm happy that there's still an opportunity that I can make certain injections in the budget to be presented on Thursday morning. And one of which I could give you a commitment I'll be inclined to inject in there is that this executive will do some sort of polling, some mechanism of polling,
Yes.
to get what the people want. I don't think that there is anything illegal about going at it referendum style. The referendum won't have the weight of normal referendum, but it will be one where people actually come out and vote to give us a clear idea. That's a venture worth thinking about. Every man and woman coming out and saying, giving a sheet of paper, and this happens in democracies all over the world. Switzerland, in some states in the US, you see it. You get a long sheet of paper, you tick yes to what you want, no to what you don't like, and we could itemize some of the core principles that are floated around the space, from big art to Watson Duke. We could and be able to get a sense on people, this is exactly what we want. But you ask a fundamental question: what does autonomy mean to you? And I want you to answer that question, Desi. Well, what does autonomy mean to you?
Autonomy might mean different things to different folks. But for me, I'm just about 40-something years old, and I discover growing up, experiencing living in Tobago, I recognize that every time autonomy is presented, it is always presented with an adjective that I don't like, which is greater autonomy. Follow where I'm going. It seems to me that what Tobago should desire is the greatest autonomy they could have, which is really sovereignty. Because the arrangement between Trinidad and Tobago clearly have shown where autonomy is given to us incrementally. The first assembly, we gain some more power. The second assembly, which we are currently running under, we gain some more power. But clearly from Port of Spain's perspective, is to give Tobago a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And if you was to follow that pattern, Tobago will not realize its full potential. And I'm saying if we approach Port of Spain where we desire sovereignty, maybe in a confederative type setup, then they will consider we don't want to lose Tobago. And then you find that with that now we'll have the capacity to bargain. Because we were just speaking about oil and gas in the water, and we know for sure that nobody in Trinidad wants to really diversify, because oil is carbon, we call it fossil fuel, is in high demand still, right? And I'm saying with that bargaining point, knowing that Tobago has this and has that, it means that we'll be able to even aim, saying, okay, we are aiming for sovereignty, but you know what, we'll be able to get greater autonomy along the way, because Trinidad will recognize, if things ain't go so well for Tobago, Tobago could, as the old people say, take a Georgie bundle. I'm not saying that we ought to secede, but I'm saying we should approach it like that, where we will be seen now as a big boy in the thing now, not being subordinate to Trinidad, where we just take a little, but we are now equal partners now coming to the table. That is my view of the autonomy approach.
Well, certainly that's also the Watsonian approach. And he has said it before, you approach the negotiation table with the extremist position, the most extreme position, and negotiate from that place, as opposed to trying to pitch what you really want and hope that they will give it one time. So it's a case of what strategy is best to get Port of Spain to move. I mean, it truly breaks my heart that we have to depend on people in another place to give us what is inherently a human right. And is a concept, Dr. James, that I struggle to cope with. That as a human being, the world has said through United Nations that I have an inalienable right to self-determination, to determine how I am governed, who governs me, what is the structure of my government. I have that as a right, as a human being. And yet, as a human being living in 2022, hundreds of years removed from the last World War, well, a little over 100 years removed from the last World War, that I still have to beg somebody else in another place to give me that right to self-determination. And more so, it's happening in a post-colonial society, a society that experienced the traumas and the horrors of the enslavement of one group of people and indentureship of another. And I see the whole nonsensical argument about name and who name what and all kind of foolishness. When in reality is, as a society, having experienced such a disadvantage, where we refused the right to self-determination and had to fight for it intellectually, had to prove ourselves over and over again, had to send up Dr. Williams and a crew up there to try to get this thing and wrestle this thing. In 2022, we still have in our nation a group of people, ourselves, having to to feel as though we have to just beg for this thing, beg a little harder, plead a little more, come up with a creative strategy to get this thing. And it's something that I wrestle with every single day of my political life. Why should I have to beg so hard for people in another place to give me what is inalienably my own right?
Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have to beg. And in general, ever since 1949 and after, with the Charter of Rights, the International Charter of Human Rights, every island, every group of people, ethnic groups and all of these kinds of things, have had this right to self-determination. And so Tobago can secede from Trinidad and Tobago if it wants, just like Trinidad can secede from Trinidad and Tobago if it wants to. None of the two islands is bound to be within the nation state of Trinidad and Tobago. What the Tobagonians have to ponder on, and what Trinidad has to ponder on, is what makes sense for itself and for the collective. And I think...
And there's two kind of sense you're talking about, eh? Mm-hmm. By the way, the series of consultations I've had, the title is Make It Make Sense. Yeah. But it's a play on the word sense. Yeah. Whether it's C-E-N-T-S or S-E-N-S-E.
Yeah. Well,
both sense must be made.
I specifically mean S-E-N-S-E. I mean we have to ponder on whether it makes political sense, economic sense, and sociological sense for Tobago to secede or for Trinidad to secede. And when I study the world, I think as a general answer, it's no to both Tobago and to Trinidad. Then the question becomes, what arrangement should we work out to live as one nation? And that is what raises the questions you started with. What kind of democratic framework would best serve the interests of the country? And I think the evidence we have about the incentive that oil and gas prices give to Trinidadians to keep the economy that we have in the vulnerable state it is in, the evidence we have tells us that autonomy to allow Tobago to prosecute the agenda of diversification on behalf of the nation is what makes the most sense to me. Now, if I were going down the road of asking the people of Tobago what they want, I would not do a Jamaican type referendum. I would go with pretty simple questions to the people of Tobago. First question I would ask the people, what is this Tobago we're talking about? Is it the Tobago in the THA Act with a little 6-mile ring around it? Or is it the Tobago with the median line as our boundary, south, and everything north of that all the way up to Barbados is Tobago? And I think if we go with the question in that form, you almost don't have to go. Almost every Tobagonian will say, that bigger Tobago is the one we want, that give you all access to those oil and gas reserves.
What is interesting, what you're describing is the kind of referendum I'm thinking. I'm not thinking of a simple yes or no, stay or leave referendum.
No, a bill in the parliament.
I'm thinking about us pulling out core principles, because every debate we have had, public and private, about this autonomy question, some core principles have surfaced. And we need to know once and for all how Tobagonians feel about those core principles. Exactly. Principle of boundary. What will be the physical parameters of this, of this jurisdiction we call the Tobago Island government? Where will it be? 6 miles, as you say, or beyond that? How do you define Tobago? And should it be defined in the Constitution? What should be the structure of the government? Should the structure of the government include the People's House as was last proposed? Or should we leave it out entirely and create something else? How many members should we start with? How do we find the people and where they should come from to do this representation politics? How do we manage certain aspects of the democracy, such as the use of committees and the public access to their government? Some of those core principles that pop up in every single debate. You know them. You were there when we were there with Mrs. Robinson-Regis and others in that Joint Select Committee. You heard it without me talking to you, without me having a prior conversation with Mr. Hochoy Charles, without me having a prior conversation with Moore Miggins and any of the others in the space, including the PNM. At that first hearing, we all practically said the same things about some of the principles. Of course, the PNM later backpedaled from some of those positions, and we understand why, the politics of the thing. But I think we need to pull out those core principles, put them somewhere in a sheet of paper, and ask the Tobagonians in some sort of questionnaire, referendum, massive type census, how do you feel about these items? What do you feel about those items? And have statistically to say X percentage won this, we're going with that. And of course, democratization of even that will mean, Dr. James, that there may be some things I will like to see that I may not get. The people may say, I disagree, I want something else. And I will be duty bound to stick with what the majority wants, and hopefully later on, as we evolve in our governance structure, they may come to the vision that I might personally have. But, and I think that will also force Tobagonians to be unified in what we're saying. Because if we have a survey, Dr. James, and 90% say they want X, it will be hard pressed for a vocal Tobagonian to come out and now say, I want something different to what 95% say. Don't go with that.
But I may point out that the issue of the boundary is a simple issue. Mm-hmm. The issue of boundary suited to Tobago is one issue. A boundary Trinidadians would agree to is a different issue. So, from a Tobago perspective, and bearing in mind our right to self-determination, there is a way to get to a set of proposals that would work for the country without having to use a chain of referendums. I think the system that we see working in democracies elsewhere is the one in which you would have a bill crafted, say, expert bill, expertly done. A bill is a pretty complicated thing. You bring a team of lawyers, you bring a team of economists and so on, political scientists, haggle it out and come up with a draft bill. And then you treat it like any other project. In a democratic environment, you would take that project to every segment of the society, broken up in whatever ways you want. You could take it to young people, you could take it to the villages, you could take it to the professionals, and you hear from them with your expert team participating in the process and gathering the data, what they want, and they assemble that information. And having assembled that information, you take it to your plenary. That's a standard way democratic processes yield you the opinion of the people.
But haven't we tried that before and it didn't
It's
result?
never really been properly done.
For example, the Tobago Island government bill sent down to Trinidad came on the heels of probably the most extensive piece of community consultative work done on the island.
In my view,
in terms of spread and how many people they spoke to and so on. And the parliament still rejected it. And I have a second concern to is which is whenever we do these programs and we go to communities and villages and youth groups and so on, we tend to also always have a significant number of the population that for some reason just doesn't show up. They tend to be who I frame in my mind as those who are disconnected by purpose, on purpose. And wouldn't it be easier to just do census-wise how people feel about particular principles in one massive census, so we could have definitively X percentage of the population resident on the island believe this or want this, and in that way we have an even surer scientific number than just hearing views and trying to collate and bring it together.
But let me point out that having observed all the processes from Maury to now, I don't think we've ever really done the consultative processes properly, ever, including when we got the island government bills through Orville. The critical thing that marks all of them, from Robinson to that last round of bills, is that they were all driven by the executive. If you were there watching the processes the way I did, they were all led by the chief secretary, by the chief secretary's lawyers, the THA lawyers, and so on. In a democratic process, that's not what you do. In a democratic process, if we had a THA set up the way it should be for a democratic process, it's the representatives of the people who would be the people carrying the question to the population, up and down in Tobago. Not the executive component of the legislature, but the non-executive component. If that was the majority, as it should be in a democratic environment, it is those people who would take these questions as the representatives of the people outside the executive to the population. Now, we don't have that luxury because we have not set up the government that way now or then. Now, what I have observed is that there are alternatives to that around the world. And the alternative is to use non-executive independent expertise and have them go to the people with the endorsement of the set of representatives we've elected and say, this is what the executive is proposing. The team of experts, the public servants, this is what they are proposing. What do you think here, Charlottesville? What do you think in Speyside? What do you think in Mason Hall? And you canvass all of Tobago, not with the executive there browbeating people and telling people, well, this is what I want, but giving the people with a public education program backing it the opportunity to make up their own minds. In a democratic process, it's a coalition of the willing. It's who come. You open the opportunity to everybody to come. You do the public education to encourage people to understand why they should come, but you don't hold up the democratic process waiting on the reluctant ones to come. You do everything in your power to encourage everybody to come. You do some of it online, you do all of those kinds of things. But the key idea is that it is not the executive in the way I have seen it done all from Robinson to now. It is not the executive that carries the question to the public. It's the elected representatives, if you outside the executive, if you have the government set up properly, and if not, it's a group of expert people who are endorsed by the executive and the elected reps to go and ask the people what they think. And I think when you do that, you have a better chance to get to what people want without the executive members coming there and browbeaten. And you remember, the reason you have to worry about that is you, the executive, give out the jobs. You give out the opportunities. People come into sessions in which you are speaking up on a point of view. People will say, well, let me not say anything to anger Farley because he mightn't give me no work. so that's why all over the world where democracies are set up, you never see, like in the US or in Britain, you never see the executive hold these consultations in the way you're doing from the democratic standpoint. They hold them to find out what the people want. But when you're talking on the democratic side, it's the non-executive people who would do it.
Well,
so that's the sense in which I think you have to be careful.
I know Nicholas wants to come back in.
I want to ask this question as we're on the subject. What if we work out the consultative process properly, as Dr. James is saying, right? Now, I think the problem is Port of Spain regarding us. That is really the problem, because let's say, okay, we went through a process the other day, well, prior to the other day, with the Orville London and that process. Now, Port of Spain didn't really know for sure what went on in Tobago. We on the ground know what we went through. So let's say we find a better process to go through, a more democratic process, all right? The problem that we really have is not just the process here. And of course, we like to have that work out so that every citizen in Tobago should be pleased, or at least the majority, right? Democracy. But the issue that we really have, or that we will continue to encounter, is how Port of Spain regard us and our decisions.
And you see, that for me, Desi, is part of my fear with what Dr. James is proposing. Not that I have an issue with doing the consultative process the way he's proposing we do. In fact, that's what should happen in a democracy.
Right.
Of course, having a small population size will challenge that, because you will be hard pressed to find many independent, so-called independent voices that are not aligned one way or the other, and haven't aligned one way or the other with either team. But
no, it's just that not in the executive. That's the only non-aligned.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Right. Yeah. But from where I sit, I saw Orville London, PNM, went through a process. So I will not believe that his party in Trinidad did not understand the processes he used.
Definitely.
After he did that process and sent a bill to Parliament, I will always go back to Dr. Rowley presenting that bill in Parliament to go before the Joint Select Committee. Dr. Rowley, in that presentation, I've said it before, hit the nail squarely on the head in terms of what Tobago wanted. He spoke about a federal type system. He spoke about defining the island of Tobago and the boundaries and all of those things. Fast track to when he got to the JSC, members of his own party, who he put in charge to run the JSC, turned around and said to me, well, we weren't looking at any federal type system when we were doing this work. We weren't regarding anything about defining any Tobago at all when we did this work. Notwithstanding the fact that their own leader and the head of the cabinet, in presenting the thing to the Parliament, mooted almost word for word what Tobago at the time was saying it wants. And my only fear is we could do the best consultative process in Tobago,
definitely,
go to the Parliament, and somebody will say, I can disregard that. But I think it's a little harder. I mean, we could do a hybrid, we could do a mixture of both. But I think it is harder for the National Parliament to disregard numbers, as in statistical data, the way Nicholas was suggesting.
Yes, and more than that, one of the things that I'm advocating for is an evaluation to be done of Tobago's resources, and I would dare to say perceived resources as well, because we talk about negotiation earlier, and I wouldn't want to enter into a negotiation with anybody not knowing the value of what I have, because I could have my phone here and my phone could be worth $6,000, and because I don't know the value of my phone, I think my phone is just to make a phone call and hang up and so on. This is just a phone. You could give me a 300 and take it. You understand? So in the whole dynamic of going out and talking to people and trying to get from them what they think about any particular issue, the most important thing, and Dr. James alluded to it earlier, is an education drive. And it mustn't only come from the government, it must also come from the opposition as well. They must be provided with an opportunity to give an alternative. So if you have an idea or a philosophy and you are putting it forward to the general public, I think it's only right that the opposition should be side by side offering an alternative as well, and then it's up to the people to make a determination as to which one we're going with. And it doesn't matter if I'm in power and the people like the opposition idea a little bit more. It's the responsible thing to do to say, listen, we're living in a democracy, so we're going to go down the road of accepting whichever
people prefer.
The people prefer.
I agree with that, and I assure you that any consultative process I would do on autonomy, any movements on autonomy, any national advocacy on autonomy, representing the THA formally, I assure you I will ask the minority to accompany me, because I think in this space far too often we allow differences of opinions to take away from the greater fight. I am certain when we were preparing and advocating for independence in 1962, granted Tobago wasn't really considered in that conversation up in the House of Lords, but I am certain that Williams and Capeldio and those guys did not all see eye to eye and agree on every iota of day-to-day politics in the Trinidad space. And I say Trinidad space deliberately, because again, they weren't really paying attention to us. I am sure Butler didn't agree with everything Eric Williams was doing and saying, but it did not stop a united front from making the ask, making the request, from saying this is what we want. And again, no society is ever homogeneous in terms of thoughts and beliefs. None. Even if we are 100% the same ethnicity, same race, same religion, we will never be 100% homogeneous on ideas and opinions. And that I think should never ever stop us from collectively advocating strongly for the autonomy that we want.
May I draw your attention though to two things that helps this conversation along. One is that you could know what the population thinks without an election poll, a poll-like mechanism. You don't need to do an opinion poll. If you run the hearings processes properly, especially with modern day technologies, you can know what the preponderance of the evidence signals that every participating group wants done. So you could know it for every village, you could know it for the batch of teachers who participate, you could know it for everybody without doing an opinion poll. So we wouldn't lack the data from a proper process to take to Port of Spain. Secondly, I want to make the observation with respect to Port of Spain's reaction is that part of Tobago's responsibility is to educate Trinidadians about what is in the country's interest. We have for too long, since 1889, gone about national business with a kind of second-class citizen mentality in Tobago. What we need as Tobagonians to begin to do is to speak to the interests of the country with the same sense of leadership and authority that Trinidad takes for granted. And maybe your generation of leaders could begin to try that. So when you put forward a budget, it's a budget for Trinidad and Tobago developed in Scarborough, rather than a budget for Tobago ignoring Trinidad. My point is, you don't need to have this situation where you go to Trinidad and then everything is about they don't like what you're saying. If you don't do the public education and you don't move people to understand the case you are making about the country's interest as expressed in what Tobago wants done, then you have a problem. But if you do it properly, you have a real shot at moving both the country and Tobago forward. So I wouldn't say this generation should go about this business as if we are second-class citizens here.
Well, I could tell you we have begun some of the measures for that sort of public education campaign in Trinidad. We are almost there with opening THA's first outpost in Port of Spain. In fact, I could tell you exactly where, Pembroke Street. And I will give more details on that in the budget on Thursday. The reason for that outpost is not because we want to send the Deputy Chief Secretary to Trinidad to sit down in a nice office in Port of Spain. It's because, one, we have a significant diaspora community residing in Trinidad that we have to empower to also speak on our behalf. And to empower them, we have to educate them to speak on our behalf. Many of whom are captains of industries in Trinidad and have significant power and influence in the society there, and must use that to help the society that they left. And they leave it because of the same lack of autonomy issue that has resulted in the scarcity of opportunities and all the other scarcities when it comes to living here that has made them decide that Tobago is not the place for them to live. They have to live and make life in Trinidad. No fault of theirs and nothing wrong with that. But now we have to engage them as our first point of reference in Port of Spain to say, look, you have to help us educate the rest of the Trinidad population that this is what this thing really means for the entire nation. And so the Deputy Chief Secretary, we have built into our executive, for the first time, a standalone division in that of the Deputy Chief Secretary, which many people in space didn't even know legally was possible. They didn't realize that it was always the case that the Deputy Chief Secretary was a standalone division. We're just doing it that way because we believe there has to be concerted effort, purposeful intervention in the Port of Spain space, in the Trinidad space, when it comes to this matter of autonomy. And yes, some of that requires some disruption in the politics in Trinidad. I have not seen revolutions happen anywhere without disruption and some disruptiveness. That doesn't mean violence. It doesn't mean that we go in and bomb down the place. It's not that kind of disruption we're talking about. But no political revolution has happened anywhere. No kind of society has changed anywhere without a disturbance of life as we know it. And so that move to Port of Spain is to disturb life in Trinidad as we know it, to the extent that we educate our population down there about that which Tobago requires, that is really in the best interest of the entire society. Yes, Desi?
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, I mean, when I consider the state of Trinidad and Tobago, I think Trinidad and Tobago have had a false start from after becoming a republic. And what they should have done at that juncture was to, in some form, some legislative framework should have been in place to have Trinidad and Tobago be equal partners. There's a famous quote from APT James that said, he said that we ought to be partners with Trinidad, not part of Trinidad. And I think for years till this day, Tobago and Tobagonians have grown accustomed to being, as Dr. James mentioned, the psyche of the Tobagonian is to be in a subordinate position where we are a so-called second-class citizen. And I think as we are talking about education and educating Trinidad, I think that the education needs to start from here, because even here, some people, when they bring up the autonomy issue, or as I just put it, the sovereignty issue, people is like, we're talking about, you know what I mean? Trinidad and Tobago is one. The reality is, Trinidad and Tobago is really two countries that form one state. That is the reality. Hence the reason when you make up the CAST form, you'll see country and then you'll see nationality. Trinidad and Tobago is really two countries that form one state.
Well, I'll reverse it because as someone who taught in social sciences, And there's a difference between a nation and a country.
And a
so
country.
it's really two nations making up
one state.
One country, one
Right.
state.
So what I'm saying is that the education push should start from right here in Tobago, starting from the history, starting from the annexation in 1889, and let Tobagoans get a sense of understanding the struggle from Bigard to APT James, come right up, as I say, right up to Mr. Duke. So,
but you have to let Trinidadians also, at the point of
in the same process here, in the same
Trinidadians have
process.
to also understand that and what that has meant for us.
Truth. And I'm saying to know, the objective should be, this is the ideal now, I ain't saying we'll get that. The objective should be for us to be partners. And that is one of the reasons why I love the confederation idea. Everybody might not like it, because it will be a sovereign Trinidad, a sovereign Tobago forming an alliance, right? And Tobago govern Tobago, Trinidad govern Trinidad, and they will have committees set up for things that we concur on, you know what I mean? Whether we share national security or, you know, share the same dollar, well, freedom of travel between both. That is just my, as I was usually telling Nicholas, this is my dream for Tobago then. But as long as we are in this situation where we are psychologically seen as subordinate to Trinidad, and not just psychological alone, but in the constitution, we are actually subordinate to Trinidad. As long as we are in that, we'll continue to fight and fight and fight and even get the best consultation around Tobago. And still, when we take it to Trinidad, it is just...
Well, the challenge with confederation is that you more or less need Trinidad to also agree to confederation. But within the Commonwealth, we have examples where one half of a country more or less has a state government. You look at St. Kitts and Nevis. Yeah. There is no St. Kitts state government separate and apart from the national government. But they still refer to themselves as a federation, with Nevis having some significant autonomy in the whole process. So we have to just wait. We also have to ask ourselves, Nicholas, and I'm coming to you on this, the question of time. How much longer are you prepared to wait? That you think Tobagonians are prepared to wait to get this? Do we want it now? As in we want it within a year? Is all of this possible within a year? Does it require a little longer build-out? Should we be a bit more patient in getting what we need? The question is time, because I just glanced the comments coming in from the public, and one of the things they're asking about is time. How long will it take to do the kind of consultation we want? Versus polling, versus, I don't know, some other political action.
Yes, so that is why I propose that we don't go about trying to reinvent the wheel and trying to go about doing the consultations that were already done. What we need to do is to get the figure as to how many people in Tobago agree with whatsoever policy that is on the table. My brother here mentioned confederalism. Some people are talking federalism, and some people are happy with the Tobago Island Government Bill. I am not here to say...
some people want secession.
Some people, yes, some people want secession.
A few from what I know.
Yes, so all should be on the table. None shouldn't be taken off because I don't like that, so I am the chief secretary, so no, or I am the prime minister, so that shouldn't be on the table. All should be on the table, and at the end of the day, the people should choose. So I'm saying that we are at the junction now where we, the Tobagonian folk, can make a choice. I'm prepared to make a choice. I hope that we can make a choice. We can make a choice in this year before October. October is very significant to me because that is the national budget.
Start of the new fiscal year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're going to go back now to. No. Normally, what happens is that after the October budget, the THA goes into a retreat and decides, well,
how we allocate,
how we going to allocate the funding that we just received. I'm saying at that time, people should have the opportunity to say, well, this is what I think is the priority project for Tobago. I think that a commercial port is most important, rather than another football field or something like that. So
well,
you're talking to something additional now about actual use of resources
yeah.
outside of the autonomy.
But the
area.
point he's making requires some reflection, because he's right to say that we need to know what the people want.
Correct.
The question is,
The strategy
how
to-
do you get to know what the people want? And my point
Same point.
earlier made was, you don't, first of all, if you run a Jamaican style referendum or a opinion poll, I could tell you as a trained statistician, you're not likely to get anything that constitutes sensible answers to the package you are interested in. What is done in democratic processes is you take the budget or whatever documentation you want to deal with, you take the bill, the autonomy bill, to the public with a public education program. A big part of the public education program is the discussion that goes on. So you bring, let me just illustrate it in a simple way. You put this particular type of committee together that is appropriate for the legislative framework we have in Tobago, since we have not set up a government to do it properly. But you set up the appropriate committee and you go to Charlottesville. And you get the village councils and the community organizations, the churches, and everything to rally people to come out to participate. When we went with our development plan, the whole village came. Okay. When they come, you remember in the modern day, you are able to record the whole session. You're able to give everybody a chance to talk. You could go 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, how many number of hearings you're having. And you give the community a chance to weigh in on the whole thing. So if it's the bill, it's okay. If it's the budget, the same thing. You ask, what do you think about clause 1, clause 2, clause 3, clause 4, and so on. And you have discussion, you have explanation. At the end of the day, you make up your mind. This is practiced all over the world in something we call participatory budgeting. So you can know what the community wants. And you can know that for every community.
So at the end of it, you will have the numbers?
You will have numbers, you could have proportions, you could have any opinion.
But that's not going to be time sensitive though, if we have to do it properly in terms of the detail.
It would be time sensitive.
No,
because
he is suggesting we get our funding from Trinidad and then we engage this exercise.
This is on the budget.
On the budget and get it for October.
Exactly.
And I'm saying to go around the entire island and do that on the budget in time for the end of October will not necessarily be practical.
But that's the budget.
That's the budget.
I would budget for Tobago differently.
I was making a point with the budget, since he raised the budget in that way. That will take a longer time.
Tobago needs to budget differently.
And at the same time, the process for keeping the government going and governing happening has to continue. It doesn't stop.
Yeah.
So
we can deal with the budget itself as a process to get the public's opinion on the budget. It doesn't have to be set in the time frame that fits the Port of Spain fiscal year.
No.
But when you're talking about the opinions with respect to autonomy, we can get that opinion properly, scientifically, soundly, knowing what Tobago people want, with numbers, with statistical evidence of any kind that you need. And you could get it in the modern day far more thoroughly and better than any opinion poll could give you. So if the main point is the advantage of the democratic processes with the modern technologies we have, is that you really can say this is what Tobago people want. It is entirely possible.
We will have to exploit some more. We'll have to exploit some more, Nicholas.
Yeah, well, we were talking earlier, and he's saying modern technology and so on. And you know, I'm thinking about, and I don't want to give things away, but I know that, you know, persons would have come to you concerning an app
Correct, yeah.
right? To fast track this kind of consultation process, so that you could wake up in the morning and actually, you know, vote based on certain things, certain policies, certain things that you want to be top on the agenda and so on. That is something that I think that should be first and foremost on the agenda.
And you have to back it with public education, because people
education,
will want explanations. There will be technicalities they don't understand.
And that's what I'm saying. You have to put in place for the government to put forward their initiative and so on, and their agendas, and educate the people, and also leave a slot there for the opposition and whoever,
and the NGOs and so on. Exactly right. It can be done properly if you put your mind to it, and if you want democracy to reign.
But Chief, I was thinking, you know, within this first 4 years, and I'm thinking.
I like what I said within the first 4 years, but continue.
well, I'm optimistic. Anyway, within the first 4 years, I'm thinking we need to go on a educational kind of drive where Tobagonians are so informed as to our real position. Because if we were to do consultations now, some people will make decisions based on propaganda that was given to them before, or false or misinformation. So I'm saying now, what we should do first is educate the public about Tobago's true position. Like, for example, Nick was saying that we need to know the kind of figures that we contribute to the national treasury, right? I remember importing a Lancer some years back, and when the check was done in the bank, the address was to Port of Spain. It was to the Comptroller of Customs and Excise in Port of Spain. The point I'm drawing is that there are a lot of monies that are generated from Tobagonians, but are consolidated in Port of Spain, if you understand what I'm saying. So in the minds of some Tobagonians, you know, we have a saying in local parlance, Tobago don't generate nothing, we don't contribute nothing, we can't, you know what I mean? It's like we have no work then, economically. So I'm saying is that this type of information need to be, first you have to do the research to see, well, okay, all right, this is what we contribute to the national treasury. And then when we get the data, then we disperse the data, inform. So at the end, close to the 4 years, we say, okay, here I'm now. We get all the information, we did all the education and so on. Now people can make an informed decision as to what we want in regards to self-determination.
Well, I could tell you, and I'm giving away one thing from the budget on Thursday, is that the plan of the executive is to ask Dr. James, who is here, to lead a team to do that sort of extensive research and strategic planning for the island. The last comprehensive economic development plan the island had, that expired many years ago.
Okay.
I have also heard the grave misinformation, and when it's coming from the highest levels of governance in the country, you have to be concerned, right? And you have to understand that that is also purposeful, because it's more than just an economic question that people are giving the wrong answers to. It's about purposefully miseducating a population to then in turn control the psyche of a people. And I want you to understand that. So when a prime minister will say, oh, let's only make 200 million, that is all others contribute. And people, even Tobagonians in the space, run away with that and say, well, we don't really contribute much. We're just waiting on Trinidad to give me a little something. And then Trinidadians saying it and people here echoing it. And people saying it in a room and Tobagonians standing up and saying, hey, and applauding. You understand the kind of psychological damage that is being done from that kind of misinformation, which is very purposeful in so doing. And it's one of the reasons that one of the first things I do when I engage information division, in fact, they produce a proposal that we're reviewing now. I said to them, information division cannot be our propaganda machinery. Information division can't be as if we're living in North Korea and the only thing you're showing is Farley alone. Yes, you could show Farley and what Farley is doing, which is fine, but if you notice now on information division page, they're showing a lot what other Tobagonians are doing, they're showing what other secretaries are doing, other divisions, they're highlighting NGOs and CBOs and initiatives from the community and so on, to the point where some people have said, come to me and said, but Farley, You ain't talking enough. You ain't coming on screen enough. No, information division cannot be about propagating propaganda. It has to be about informing and educating the public. And that has to be our version of PBS, public broadcasting station in the US, or service in the US. They do everything from Sesame Street. They do debates. They do hearings. They bring leaders and captains of industry to talk to people. They do infomercials. They do documentaries. They do all kind of things. Because it is understood that no society could be properly developed without there being a proper strategy to educate the public the way you're talking, Nicholas. And I'm happy you raise it, because you know it, Desi knows it, Dr. James knows it, I know it, but there are several Tobagonians who don't know what we in fact contribute to the national purse. And Dr. James actually did some scientific research on that since Mr. London's time. What that figure and that question, the answer to that question is today, we will have to do some updated research and inquiry, which is not hard to do.
I would like to finalize a point between Desi and Nick.
Nicholas.
About the people's opinion. Not the link from what you're saying there. After you get the data from all of these things we're talking about, going around to the communities and so on, rather than a simple opinion poll, after you get it, if you're really running a democratic process, you know what you do with it? You're not worried about Trinidad, you know? You take the data and you bring it to these 15 elected people that you put sit down here. And you say, this is what the people at Tobago say.
Yes.
80% of them say this. But we elected you to take all that information and go sit down there and make a decision. That will bring the opposition in, because they're in the house, in the proportions the people at Tobago put them there. And they get to weigh in and engage in a debate. And they all get to take a majority vote as is required in the plenary. And said, when you do that, all over the world, that means the people of Tobago say. If you're taking this to go to Trinidad, it is when we pass it here, after all these hearings and consultations and opinion polls and so on, we bring it here, and they decide, and then they take that, package it, and carry it to Port of Spain and say, this is what the people at Tobago say. If we did that democratic process properly, Port of Spain would be fanning the flames of secession to continually ignore what we say, if you do it properly.
Agreed.
The fact is, we have never been doing it properly. And therefore, we never have had the opportunity to go to Port of Spain with the legitimacy to say, here is what Tobagonians want. So them could say in Trinidad, Tobago don't know what they want. But when you put it properly, put it together properly, with all the systems in place, Tobago will be able to say, this is what we want. And I wanted to close that point, because you're onto something when you say you want to know what people say. And that same thing could be done with the budget. If you do the budget process in a way that gives time for the Secretary of Finance to bring the data to the public and say, tell me what you think.
It could be done on any issue regarding
any issue.
Yeah, so but there's something that I wanted to touch on before we leave.
Yeah,
it is the fact that we have a level of autonomy now, and we aren't even able to actualize it in its fullest potential. Because when I look at the items under the 5th schedule, right, I see so many things that we can't even say, but wait, we have control over this, but let me take control of it. Because one thing I would agree with the Prime Minister on is that when you're in governance, it takes cash to care. So if you want to actually take the port, for instance, or take the airport, take control and management of the airport and the port, it means now that you have to be able to facilitate the financial arrangement that comes with that. I am saying, I am
I
asking,
like the way you're going.
no, I'm asking a question, right? Because we have the dispute resolution committee in place, right? So I'm saying, if it is that the current administration said, listen, all these things that fall under the 5th schedule, we would like to take control of them, please, according to law, right? But given that 4.03% of the budget cannot facilitate this, we would like to have this as opposed to, you know, to 4.03. But I think it was 4.5% was the last allocation, right?
It has never reached 5%.
Yeah, 4.5. So I'm saying that, how can we take that matter to the dispute resolution committee, and can it hold water? Because we're saying that this is actually under the 5th schedule, but we don't manage it because we cannot fund it. But seeing that we are a unitary state and whatever, can we have the money to manage that?
Yes, we can go back to the DRC. The DRC, there is no time limit. There is no limit on the number of times a DRC can be triggered. A DRC can be triggered to update and upgrade what happened from 2000, 2001 to now. And yes, we could do it on that basis. I could tell you, I had cause recently to say to the executive, with that same matter with the airport, I said, listen, we can't want greater autonomy and don't want greater responsibility. If they say airport is ours, I am of the opinion we find the money and pay to get the airport open the longer hours. The airport management should be under the THA as per the law. I've even gone further. You see all of those companies and state agencies listed in the 7th schedule that the law says supposed to be providing their services in Tobago.
Yes.
Right? I've engaged lawyers to send them pre-action protocol letter. Because I'm saying the law says come and do it here, you come and do it here. Because I have that same opinion that you have. If the law gives us certain measures of autonomy now, we better be using them up as part of our argument that we need more. It's like giving your child $100 to go to school on a Monday morning. The child returns on Thursday with the same $100 and saying, Daddy, that money not enough, you know. But you have not used anything from the $100 that you were given. How do you make an argument that is not enough when you have not been utilizing some of the facilities in the law? So yes, we have to do the consultations, the polling, and all of those things. We have to agitate for the autonomy that we really want, the greatest autonomy you're saying we should start with. Agitate for that. But simultaneously, there are things right there in the THA Act that we have not even touched on. You talk about sending your check to the controller of accounts and so on. Are you aware the THA Act requires that all taxes for economic activity in Tobago be paid in Tobago? But still, every one of those companies, right now we're sitting in the middle of a set of them. FCB on one hand, RBC there, Unitrust there, Republic right there. Every single one of those companies, Courts on the next side, every one of them could tell you how much money each branch making. They could tell how much a Tobago branch is making. So there are really no excuses why companies still ain't paying their taxes for Tobago, in Tobago, and or when it's paid, it's collected on our behalf and sent. To be honest, Mr. Charles and I don't always see eye to eye, and we just butt head plenty, right? Is my friend, we just butt head plenty. But one of the things he started doing before being kicked out of office was to make an arrangement where you could pay your taxes essentially wherever, but the forms and so on for paying of taxes require the disaggregation of the remittances. So you could tell whether you're paying for your branch in Tobago versus if you're paying for your branch in Trinidad, and it be channeled back to Tobago, that which is for Tobago. And that's just one of the many areas that the law gives some measure of autonomy on, that we just have not found a solution for, we have not enacted for one reason or the other. But yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we have to push to use up all of which we now have some authority for, while we simultaneously push for more. I'm not saying it's one or the other. We have to learn that we could do 2 and 3 things simultaneously. And to do that, it means that the executive not doing all of it, as Dr. James pointed out. Because if the executive had to do all of it, it will not all get done. Naturally.
Can I help you out with two important points?
Sure.
I think we're getting close to some sort of reasonable consensus here. The first is that if I were you, autonomy would be a development project for Tobago, put forward by the Office of the Deputy Chief Secretary, but it would be a project.
We put in budget, but go ahead.
$35 million to it. These are the returns we expect from it. It's going to come in the form of budgetary allocations, it's going to come in the form of impact, and so on, done properly. You've not had time in this dispensation yet to do anything like that properly, but it should be done project-wise, properly designed, in the development planning framework and all of that sort of stuff.
Well, let me assure you that that is in fact the direction we're heading in.
Okay, good.
In fact, and that will be announced on Thursday, and where we are with that as a project.
The process of budgeting needs to be put in place properly, and that's the second point I want to make, that in addition to autonomy being a project, budgeting itself, to use up the resources, the opportunities that are built into the law, you've got to budget structurally properly. Meaning, we need to have the framework that we are selling to Trinidad and Tobago. This is the development plan, this is the macroeconomic framework, this is the medium-term policy framework, and so on, in the context of which we're going to spend. And you build that framework with the help of the divisions, each division having a share of the work to do, properly explained and properly built out as projects. Now, if you did that, every one of the areas you have under the 5th schedule would come in one form or another, whether it's agriculture or infrastructure or whatever. Projects will be considered for all of them within the framework of any serious development planning effort. So for you to get what you want, you need the Secretary of Finance to put a proper budgeting process in place that would allow the divisions to play the role and the public to do the things you're talking about, where the public also gets to weigh in and say, we've seen what the divisions are proposing, this is what we think. When you give the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Finance budgeting of that type, the opportunity to consider every one of the items in the 5th schedule
Will be there.
will exist. And
Definitely.
only then would you be able to get the most out of the powers that are there.
Are they? Definitely. Gentlemen, we have 4 minutes remaining. And I want some closing from you all, closing thoughts from you all. I'm going to start with, can I start with the junior most, I'm assuming, to the senior most? So, yes.
Yes, well, first of all, let me just say thank you for having me on the program. I was very surprised by the invitation, seeing that, you know, my views are very unbiased in terms of political agendas and so on.
And you have criticized me sometimes.
Yes, I have criticized
which I have no
you.
problems with at all.
Yes, so that's why I was very surprised, you know, having me, and that speaks to what democracy should look like. You know, so everybody should have an equal say, and you shouldn't be victimized and scrutinized because of that, but you should be heard. And I believe that if we get everybody to have their voices heard, and we get to understand the dynamics behind it in terms of the numbers, then we could really see a democratic Tobago, and we could use it as a catalyst to show that, because I believe that if we get something like that off the ground, then other countries are going to adopt it, and that is going to be something that I, as a Tobagonian, am going to feel very proud of. Yeah.
Certainly. Desi.
Well, first I want to say thanks for having me here too. You know, I'll repeat the same thing that Nick said, because I know at times, even on Facebook, I will have some strong opinions, and you know, especially when you use the term greatest little island, I will say no, I prefer country than island. You know, it just came back to my mind. You know, so thanks for having me and thing. And I'm saying, being a Tobagonian, I'm saying I would like to see the day when Tobago can realize its true potential. And too much of our sportsmen and our creatives and so on have to be filtered through Trinidad in order to succeed. And things like that, you know, sometimes from time to time will break my heart. So I'm saying, going forward, I would like to see you and your administration go into waters that other politicians and other administrations in the past have never gone, right? And that is my desire for you and your leadership in this assembly.
Thank you. Dr. James.
Well, let's congratulate you for putting on the session. Not for inviting me, but for putting on a serious conversation about autonomy. My summary comment is, A, put it together in the form of a serious project that is budgeted for properly, and B, I think I agree with my two colleagues here that you've given some signals to the people of Tobago tonight that you're really interested in a democratic process from the commentary. So I want to commend you on giving that signal, and I want to promise you that I'll help you to keep yourself to the commitment.
Certainly. You know, I gave one main thing away tonight that will come up in the budget, which is that subsequent to the reading of the budget on Thursday and the debates and the finalization by the Finance Committee and so on, that I am putting together a team led by Dr. James. In fact, he hasn't 100% signed on the dotted line yet. There are no contracts there. There are no agreements of how much we'll have to pay him and the team, none of that. But I'm insistent that we have that team going to, one, help with the budgeting experience for the next, the start of the next budget. Because we should, I mean, we just run into government, you have to clean all the mess, you have to try to organize. Time and space didn't allow to get that done for this first budget. But I'm clear in my mind that we should not go into a second budget without having some of those things you spoke about in place. But secondly, the reason why I titled this Autonomy and the Economy is because I don't see divorce from the economic issues, the whole autonomy question, in fact, is perhaps the corest of all the issues for us when it comes to the conversation about autonomy. And we have to, as you said, go into some waters that we haven't trod before in this dispensation. Yeah. And whether I am here or someone else is seated on this chair, Tobago has to go into uncharted waters.
For real.
Because we have tried some of these things repetitively and it has not redounded to the kinds of results that we desire. Rob Bigart talk about it. He come away with a school, Bishop's High School, and a few other gains, being able to do some doctor's exams and so on in Tobago. APT James, they call him Fargo for a reason, because they say APT James was destructive in a debate. True. Nobody could stand against him in a debate and remain standing. And he was a union leader, a union man, just like Watson is. But we still didn't get all the returns we wanted. Robinson came with a lot more suave and professorial flair. And we got somewhere, we got some movement, and you realize we got the first modern teaching out of it. And then we kept going down the road. We got some increase and improvements in 1996. But we are not where we want to be, or where we need to be, or where Trinidad and Tobago needs us to be, most importantly. It means then that we have to try some new strategies. We have to get creative with the thing. We have to engage like never before, educate like never before, push like never before. And the final thing I'll say before we close is this. For a young Tobagonian, my experience has always been, every time you are confident in yourself as a Tobagonian and your Tobagonianness, it drums up sentiments of fear from our friends and family in Trinidad. Unnecessarily so. Because there is a lack of understanding that being pro-Tobagonian does not mean being anti-Trinidadian.
Definitely.
And that fear is out of that lack of education in the Trinidad space.
True.
So they subconsciously and unconsciously fear that confidence that Tobagonians tend to come with. And I could tell you, at this moment, it will appear to me as if there is a renaissance of confidence in one's Tobagonianness. And I don't always pat myself on the back, but I would like to believe that my ascendancy here is part of that reason, that new kind of boldness I am seeing from people. And that's why I've invited you two to this space. I don't always get the chance to listen to everything you say, or watch everything you do.
True.
But from the little I've seen, I think I want to commend you all for being part of the conversation. Because I started by saying, I need some new voices and some new faces. The executive cannot simultaneously do all of this work itself. It will not work out. But if it is, we get more of you in the space doing it, helping us, we can potentially get nearer to that Tobago ideal, that Tobago dream that we want. So I want to thank you all very much for attending. Thanks to all of you who have been watching live. In fact, this was broadcasted on Facebook through at least 5 different pages. It was broadcast live every time on Tobago Channel 5. It was broadcast live on Tobago Updates, on Gael down in Trinidad, on METV down in Trinidad, and some other station in Trinidad, I can't remember the name now. But it was widely broadcasted. And I could tell you from the social media hits we have had, every single time when I do the calculation between all the pages, we are almost always above 20,000 viewers and hits in terms of interaction, which means that quite a number of Tobagonians have been able to participate. I want to extend thank yous to those who are part of the face-to-face consultations, because we had some face-to-face engagements, like with the business community, the contractors. We met with insurance agents and so on. So thank you all for participating. The bankers and some of you from the financial establishment, thank you as well. You were part of the consultative process. And we look forward to what post-Thursday will bring. This is Thursday is one thing. I could deliver the best budget ever. I could orate the best budget ever. What will be key will be how we move thereafter. In fact, as we say, the proof is always in the eating. Not just in how the pudding look, but in the eating. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Tobago. See you again on Thursday morning. Thank you to the staff at Division of Financial and Economy. If you're watching, I come in now. So you don't have to call on the phone. I come in now. We're going to finish the work tonight and be ready for Thursday morning. Thank you and God bless you all.